The universe didn't end in fire, nor did it begin with a bang. For humanity, it simply arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in silence and suffocating kindness. They called themselves the Curators, and they descended upon Earth not as conquerors, but as celestial librarians tidying up a dusty, forgotten corner of the cosmos. Their ships, vast, pearlescent teardrops, didn't burn cities or boil oceans. They hung in the sky like new moons, patient and unnervingly still. They brought with them the end of everything that had defined mankind. They cured cancer with a whisper of sonic frequencies, ended famine with nutrient synthesizers that could spin protein from sunlight, and gifted us with ethereal energy grids that hummed with clean, limitless power. They took our chaos, our struggle, our desperate, clawing ambition, and they replaced it with a placid, comfortable, and utterly meaningless peace. This was not an occupation. It was a neutering. Their price for this utopia was simple. We were to stop striving. All our frantic, messy, and brilliant attempts at reaching the stars were to be abandoned. Your species is too volatile for the galactic stage, the emissary had explained, its voice a symphony of soothing, condescending chimes that resonated directly in the mind. You are a wonder, a precious artifact. Allow us to preserve you. And so, we became a living museum, tended to by gardeners who saw us as little more than a rare, beautiful, and dangerously unpredictable flower. For most, the trade was a bargain. On Earth, life was a gentle dream. But for those like Kalen, who were born with starlight in their veins, it was a waking nightmare. Kalen lived and worked in the graveyard, a sprawling, chaotic halo of orbital debris that served as the system's official dumping ground. It was here that the Curators' gifts, once they reached their preordained expiration dates, were sent to be dismantled under the watchful eyes of the Global Prosperity Authority, the human puppet government that licked the Curators' hands. Kalen was a junkers, a scavenger, part of a crew that piloted rust bucket tugs through shimmering fields of dead alien technology. The official line was that they were reclaiming rare alloys and preventing orbital decay. The truth was a secret whispered in the static-laced privacy of their ship's comms. They were searching for a loophole. Every piece of Curator tech was a black box, a miracle machine designed to be impossible to reverse engineer. Its inner workings were shielded by quantum locks and energy fields that would slag any intrusive tool. The technology worked perfectly until the moment it was scheduled to die, at which point it would simply cease to function, its core components dissolving into inert, useless slag. It was the ultimate expression of the Curator's philosophy: enjoy the gift, but never, ever learn how it was made. Kalen's tug, the Marigold, was an ugly, stubborn vessel, its hull a patchwork of scavenged plates and welded seams. Inside, it smelled of ozone, recycled air, and the faint, metallic tang of the alien alloys they worked with. His partner, Elias, a man whose face was a road map of wrinkles and whose hands were permanently stained with conductive grease, was hunched over a diagnostic panel, his good eye squinting at a cascade of shimmering symbols. Anything Kalen asked, his voice flat. Elias grunted, a sound of profound frustration. It's the same story. The primary conduits are flawless. The energy regulation is a masterpiece. At the core is a ghost. We can see its output. We can measure its decay. But the moment we try to ping the source code, it's like throwing a rock at a ghost. For 20 years, Elias had been chasing this phantom. He believed that the Curators, in their infinite arrogance, must have left a key somewhere. a master line of code or a physical component that bypassed their own security. He called it the kernel, a single, pure, unrestricted piece of their science that would prove humanity was capable of more than just plugging in the appliances the gods had given them. Maybe there is no kernel, old man, Kalen said, nudging a floating coolant line out of his path with his boot. Maybe they're just that good. Elias finally looked up, his one good eye burning with a fire that Kalen had not seen on Earth in decades. No, nothing is perfect. Not even them. They think we're children, playing with their discarded toys. They don't watch the toys. Kyle, they watch us. They're looking for rebellion, for weapons, for armies. They're not looking for a junkers with a wrench and a half-baked theory. He pointed a trembling finger at the main view screen, where a colossal, dead artifact drifted silently. It was the central power regulator for the old orbital ring, a device the size of a small asteroid that had once powered half of North America. It had gone dark on schedule last week, and the GPA had contracted their crew to begin the disassembly. "That's where it is," Elias whispered, his voice thick with a feverish certainty. "A regulator that big can't just turn off. It has to fail-safe. It has to shunt its residual power somewhere. There has to be a physical bus, a manual override that's shielded from the core's self-destruct protocol. And if we can find it, we can capture the charge before it fully dissipates." It was the most dangerous idea Elias had ever had. Breaching the casing of a major curator artifact was a capital offense, not just with the GPA, but with the curators themselves. Their silent observers were everywhere, their sensors woven into the very fabric of their technology. "The GPA sweepers will be crawling all over that thing in a day," Kalen countered, the cold knot of fear tightening in his stomach. "We don't have the time or the equipment to cut through a hull that thick." Elias grinned, a rare and unsettling sight that stretched the tight skin over his cheekbones. "We don't have to cut. We have to listen." His plan was both insane and brilliant. He theorized that the emergency power shunt would emit a specific quantum frequency, a faint, almost undetectable resonance that would only be present in the first 72 hours after the device went inert. He had spent the last decade building a resonator designed to do nothing but listen for that one specific cosmic whisper. It was a crude device, a mess of human wires, salvaged curator focusing crystals, and a whole lot of desperate hope. If he was right, it would lead them to a maintenance port, an access panel so mundane and so obsolete by curator standards that they wouldn't even bother monitoring it. For the next 2 rotations, they worked in a state of heightened, paranoid tension. They kept their official salvaging operations on the far side of the dead regulator, dutifully stripping away outer ablative plates as their contract dictated, while the Marigold's long-range sensors, heavily modified by Elias, secretly scanned the colossal artifact. The GPA patrol ships were a constant presence, their sleek, curator-designed hulls gliding through the graveyard with an air of bored authority. Kalen felt their unseen eyes on him constantly, a suffocating pressure that made the recycled air in his suit feel thin and stale. On the 3rd day, just as Kalen was beginning to believe Elias's obsession had finally led them to a dead end, a soft chime echoed through the Marigold's cockpit, a single, pure tone. Elias froze, a plate of nutrient paste halfway to his mouth. His eye went wide. "There," he breathed, pointing to the diagnostic panel. A single thread of light was weaving its way through the chaotic static of the screen. A signal, faint but undeniable. It's on the ventral side, tucked away near the primary cooling assembly. A service conduit. They never thought we'd be smart enough to look for a back door. The plan was set into motion with a grim, silent efficiency. Kalen would perform the EVA. He was younger, his nerves steadier. Elias would remain on the Marigold, monitoring the GPA patrols and feeding Kalen the telemetry data. As Kalen suited up, the old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not just cutting a wire, son," he said, his voice heavy. "You're severing a leash. Whatever happens out there, you get that charge. You get it, and you run. You take it to the belt. You find the others. You show them what we found. You show them that the gods bleed." Kalen simply nodded, the words catching in his throat. He understood. This was not about salvaging a bit of power. It was about stealing fire. The journey across the regulator's hull was an exercise in terror. The dead artifact was so large that its curvature felt like a planet. Its surface a maze of canyons and valleys formed from alien metal. The signal led him to a small, unassuming panel, no larger than his chest, marked with curator script that his translator identified with a single, bland word, access. There were no visible locks, no seams, only a smooth, unbroken surface. Following Elias's instructions, Kalen placed a resonance key on the panel. The device hummed, its frequency matching the signal they had detected. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sigh of pressurized gas, the panel retracted, revealing a dark, cavernous space within. Inside, it was a cathedral of dead technology. Massive conduits, thick as ancient trees, snaked their way through the darkness, all of them cold and inert. All but one. Tucked away behind a larger pipe was a smaller conduit, glowing with a faint, residual blue light. It was the failsafe. The heart of the dead machine was still faintly beating. "I'm in," Kalen whispered into his comm. "I see it. It's still hot. On the Marigold." Elias's voice was tight with tension. "The capacitor is ready. You have to be precise. KL, tap the line. Draw the charge. But don't ground it. The moment that energy flows, every GPA sensor in the sector is going to light up like a nova." Kalen moved carefully, his magnetic boots clamping onto the conduit's housing. He pulled out the tapping device, a wicked-looking piece of hardware he and Elias had built in secret. It was a hybrid of human brute force and salvaged curator precision. He lined up the plasma drill, its tip hovering just over the glowing conduit. He took a deep breath, the sound of his own heart hammering in his ears. He was about to commit the ultimate sin. He was about to look inside the black box. He pressed the trigger. The drill whined, biting into the alien alloy with a scream of tortured metal. Blue-white energy arced across the chamber. On his suit's display, a torrent of data began to flow, raw and unfiltered. It was the kernel, the pure, unrestricted architectural data of a curator power system. It was everything Elias had dreamed of. "I've got it," Kalen yelled, a surge of triumph washing over him. "Elias, I've got it. The capacitor is charging." But his celebration was cut short. A new voice, cold and authoritative, crackled over his private comm, overriding their encrypted channel. "Unidentified vessel Marigold, you are in violation of GPA Salvage Code 7. You have breached a restricted artifact. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. This is your only warning." On the Marigold's view screen, 2 GPA patrol ships were accelerating towards them, their weapon ports glowing with malevolent intent. "Kalen, they're here." Elias's voice was strained, panicked. "The capacitor is only at 40%. It's not enough. It'll have to be," Kalen shouted back, working frantically to disconnect the tap. "Get out of here." "Elias, take the ship and run." "Not without the colonel," the old man growled. The data is more important than the charge. Keep the stream active. The first plasma blast struck the Marigold. The ship shuddered violently, and the lights in Kalen's helmet flickered. He could hear alarms blaring over the comm, the sound of Elias cursing as he fought to keep the shields online. A second blast hit, and this time, the ship's main engine sputtered and died. They were a sitting duck. Elias Kalen screamed. A calm, steady voice replaced the old man's. "It's all right, son." They wanted a child playing with toys. There was a pause, and in the background, Kalen could hear the distinct, terrifying sound of the Marigold's main reactor beginning to overload. Elias was turning his own ship into a bomb. Well, this child is about to throw a tantrum. The data package is sent. It's all yours now. The capacitor is detached. Go. For God's sake, go. Before Kalen could even process the words, the line went dead. He looked out of the access port just in time to see the Marigold, his home, his entire world for the last 10 years, erupt in a silent, blinding flash of white light. The explosion was massive, far larger than a ship of its size should have been capable of producing. Elias had funneled the overload through some piece of salvaged curator tech, turning his small tug into a miniature sun. The shockwave slammed into the two GPA ships, their shields flaring brightly before collapsing under the impossible force. One of them was torn in half, its wreckage tumbling away into the darkness. The other spun wildly, crippled and venting atmosphere. That one mental act of defiance. Elias had not only saved him, but had drawn a line. Humanity had just fired its first shot. Kalen, his body numb with shock and grief, clutched the capacitor to his chest. It was heavy, humming with stolen power. The first free energy humanity had wielded in a century. He was alone, a ghost in the machine, a fugitive with the universe's most dangerous secret. He had the fire. Now, he just had to find someone to give it to. He turned his back on the wreckage of his past and kicked off into the silent, star-dusted dark, heading for the deep, lawless expanse of the belt. The war had begun, and nobody knew it but him. The silence that followed the Marigold's death was a physical thing, a crushing weight that pressed in on Kalen from all sides. In the void, sound had no medium, but his mind filled the emptiness with the ghost of the explosion, a psychic scream that echoed in the marrow of his bones. He was a mote of dust, a castaway on an endless black ocean clinging to a humming, glowing piece of wreckage that was both his salvation and his damnation. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. Shock was a disease that would kill him if he let it fester. He forced his body to move, his muscles protesting as he maneuvered the bulky capacitor, orienting himself by the distant, indifferent light of Earth. The GPA would be here any second, not with patrol ships, but with a swarm of clinical, efficient recovery drones. They would sweep the area, cataloging the debris, looking for anomalies. He was the biggest anomaly in the system. The graveyard was his home turf, and he began to move, not with the panicked flailing of a survivor, but with the cold, calculated grace of a predator. He used his suit's thrusters in short, precise bursts, pushing off from larger pieces of debris to conserve fuel, letting inertia be his engine. He became a ghost, slipping through the metallic canyons of dead starships and forgotten satellites, his silhouette lost against the greater darkness. He needed to find a comm relay, one of the old pre-curator units that the GPA hadn't bothered to fully decommission. They were noisy, unreliable, and completely unsecured, used only by junkers to trade rumors and insults. It was a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. He found one nestled in the skeletal remains of an old Martian transport, a rusty dish antenna still stubbornly pointing towards the belt. As he worked to splice his suit's comm unit into the relay's power source, the official GPA broadcast began to seep into his helmet, a calm, male voice that was the auditory equivalent of a sterile white room. "An unfortunate industrial accident has occurred in high orbit," the voice announced placidly. "A salvage vessel, the Marigold, suffered a catastrophic reactor malfunction, resulting in the loss of the ship and its two-person crew. 2 GPA patrol vessels were damaged while attempting a rescue. Our benevolent partners, the Curators, have already dispatched vessels to ensure the stability of the orbital environment. They express their profound sadness at this loss of human life and remind us that adherence to safety protocols is the cornerstone of our shared prosperity." Kalen felt a surge of bile rise in his throat. An accident, a malfunction. They were erasing Elias, scrubbing his defiance from the record and turning his sacrifice into a footnote in a safety manual. The rage gave him focus. He finished the connection and sent out a single, encrypted burst of data, a signal that hadn't been used in 50 years. It was an old junker's distress call from the prospecting days, a code that meant a scavenger had found a strike so rich they couldn't haul it alone and needed a trusted partner. It was a call built on a foundation of greed and desperation, and Kalen prayed someone was still listening for it. He waited, tucked into the shadows of the dead transport, the capacitor humming softly against his back. Hours crawled by. His oxygen levels were getting low, the red warning light blinking a steady, rhythmic pulse that mocked his own frantic heartbeat. He was beginning to lose hope when a new signal, tight-beamed and heavily shielded, sliced through the static. "You're painting a mighty bright target with that old code," a woman's voice said, her tone laced with a weary cynicism. "Who's this? And what kind of ghost are you chasing?" Kalen's relief was so profound, it almost buckled his knees. "This is Kalen, ex-Marigold," he transmitted back, his voice hoarse. "I'm not chasing a ghost. I'm carrying it." A long silence followed. He could imagine them on their ship, running his name, running the Marigold's registry. They would see the official report. They would see the lie. "The GPA is reporting you dead." The woman's voice returned, a new edge of curiosity in it. "Reactor malfunction." Kalen looked at the wreckage of the GPA ship, a dark shape against the star field. "My reactor malfunctioned all over their hull," he said. The silence on the other end was different this time. It was the sound of a calculation being made, of risk being weighed against reward. "My ship is the Stone Eater. I'm 20,000 clicks from your position. I can be there in 30 minutes. If you're lying, I'll space you myself. If you're telling the truth, the ride won't be free. Stay dark." The Stone Eater was even uglier than the Marigold. It looked less like a ship and more like a mobile asteroid cracker, its hull scarred and pitted from micrometeorite impacts, its engines bulky, chemical-burning behemoths that were loud, inefficient, and, most importantly, completely free of curator technology. It was a relic of a bygone era, a snarling dog in a world of silent, graceful cats. As he was pulled into its cramped cargo bay, the outer door sealing behind him with a groaning shudder, Kalen got his first look at the crew. The captain, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood with her arms crossed. This was Anya. Beside her stood a young man, barely out of his teens, with grease-stained fingers and an expression of boundless, nerdy curiosity. This had to be Ren. Anya's eyes weren't on Kalen. They were fixed on the capacitor he was wrestling through the airlock. "That's a Type 9 energy regulator," she said, her voice even more gravelly in person. It's dead, useless. We passed 3 of them on the way here. Kalen finally got the capacitor secured to the deck plating and pulled off his helmet. The recycled air of the Stone Eater, a rich, intoxicating cocktail of sweat, oil, and real, unprocessed coffee. It's not dead, he gasped, his lungs burning. It's full. He told them everything. He told them about Elias, about the Colonel, about the chase, and the Marigold's final, defiant scream. Anya listened without expression, her face a mask of stone. But Ren's eyes grew wider and wider, his mouth hanging slightly open. When Kalen finished, the young tech was practically vibrating with excitement. The Colonel, Ren whispered, his voice full of reverence. A complete, uncaged architectural schematic. Do you know what that means? It's the blueprint. It's the Rosetta Stone of their entire energy science. It's everything. Anya, however, was unmoved. She circled the capacitor, running a gloved hand over its smooth, alien surface. It means he's the most wanted man in the system, she said flatly, her gaze finally meeting Kalen's. It means the GPA and the curators will tear this entire sector apart looking for him. He's bringing a war to my doorstep. Kalen's grief for Elias suddenly boiled over into anger. There's already a war, he snarled. You've just been pretending you're a neutral party. They put a leash on us. Anya. They turned our entire species into a pet. Elias cut the leash. What I'm carrying isn't a weapon. It's a choice. And it cost him everything. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A brief, quickly suppressed memory of the world before the curators. A world of struggle and chaos, but a world that had been theirs. Where were you headed? She asked, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. The belt, Kalen said. Elias said to find the others. He mentioned a place. The forge. Anya's expression hardened again, but this time it was with recognition. Elias was always a dreamer, she muttered. So, the old ghost hideout is real. She turned to Ren. Plug him in. Let's see if this colonel of his is worth dying for. For the next several hours, as the Stone Eater burned hard for the asteroid belt, Ren and Kalen worked in the ship's small, cluttered engineering bay. They hooked Kalen's suit computer directly into the ship's mainframe, and the moment the data package from Elias began to upload, the room fell silent. It wasn't just code. It was a living, breathing thing, a multi-dimensional tapestry of energy patterns, quantum equations, and engineering principles so far beyond human understanding that it felt like staring into the mind of a god. Ren worked with a frantic, inspired energy, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, pulling apart threads of the data, isolating variables, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It's all here, he kept whispering to himself. The power generation, the containment fields, the energy transfer. But it's shackled. Every single process is governed by a series of cascading restrictions. It's like a genius that's been forced to speak in baby talk. Anya watched from the doorway, a mug of coffee clutched in her hand. What are you talking about, kid? She asked. Ren pointed a trembling finger at a shimmering, complex equation at the heart of the schematic. This is the core principle. But look at all these subroutines wrapped around it. They're limiters. The curators aren't just giving us outdated tech. Anya, they're giving us their best tech. But it's been deliberately crippled. It's running at less than 10% of its actual capacity. This isn't a power generator. It's a nuclear reactor that's been programmed to run a toaster. He looked from Anya to Kalen. his eyes wild with the terrifying scale of the deception. They didn't give us scraps. They gave us masterpieces and then told us we were too stupid to use them for anything more than turning on the lights. The true nature of the curator's pity was suddenly laid bare. It wasn't just condescension, it was an act of profound, systemic sabotage. They hadn't just stopped humanity from advancing. They had actively ensured that any technology they provided would keep mankind in a state of perpetual, blissful infancy. The leash wasn't just a metaphor, it was coded into the very fabric of their gifts. The journey to the belt took 3 days. They flew under complete calm silence, using gravitational slingshots around Jupiter and its moons to mask their trajectory. Twice, they had to power down completely, drifting like a dead rock for hours as Curator environmental stabilization ships passed nearby, their sensors sweeping the void with a cold, indifferent precision. During the tense silence, Kalen found himself staring out at the endless black, the face of Elias swimming in the star-dusted darkness. The old man's sacrifice felt heavier now, its purpose clearer. He hadn't just died to save one man, he had died to expose a lie that had poisoned humanity for 100 years. As they neared their destination, a cluster of unremarkable C-type asteroids in a sector marked as geologically unstable on all official charts, Anya hailed him to the bridge. "We're here," she said, pointing to the view screen. At first, Kalen saw nothing but a field of tumbling, lifeless rocks. But then, as Anya transmitted a coded sequence, one of the largest asteroids, a misshapen beast several kilometers long, began to change. Sections of its surface shimmered, the holographic camouflage dissolving to reveal the dull metallic glint of a hull. Hangar bay doors way, disguised as a canyon, ground open, spilling yellow, industrial light into the void. This was the Forge. It wasn't a military base or a gleaming rebel outpost. It was a mine, a factory, and a hideout, carved into the heart of a rock, a testament to human stubbornness. As the Stone Eater glided into the hangar, Kalen saw people, dozens of them, emerging from workshops and pressure-sealed tunnels, their faces grimy with machine oil and asteroid dust. They were engineers, scientists, and exiles, the last remnants of humanity's ambition, the ones who had refused to accept the comfortable cage. They all stopped and stared as he and Anya emerged from the ship, followed by Ren, who was carrying a data slate containing the kernel as if it were the most sacred object in the universe. An older woman with a severe face and the unmistakable air of command stepped forward. "Anya," she said, her voice raspy, "you bring a stranger to our home. This is a risk." Anya simply nodded towards Kalen. "He's carrying the ghost of Elias, and he brought us fire." Kalen stepped forward, his legs unsteady on solid ground for the first time in days. He looked at the faces staring back at him, hopeful, skeptical, and terrified in equal measure. He had completed his journey. He had delivered the message, but as he looked at the raw, unfinished, and desperate state of the Forge, he realized that Elias hadn't just sent him to deliver a weapon. He had sent him to find the people who could build the army that would wield it. The real work was about to begin. The Forge was a symphony of contained violence. The air, thin and tasting of metal dust and ozone, thrummed with the ceaseless hum of carbon scrubbers and geothermal vents. In the main cavern, a vast, cathedral-like space carved from the asteroid's iron-nickel core, the rhythmic clang of magnetic hammers echoed against the raw rock walls, a counterpoint to the high-pitched whine of plasma cutters. Sparks cascaded like waterfalls in the low gravity, and the air shimmered with heat from the massive induction smelters that glowed like captive suns. This was not a place of quiet contemplation or grand strategy. It was a workshop, a grimy, sprawling testament to the stubborn, grease-stained soul of human ingenuity. It was a place where things were built and things were broken, and for 2 generations, its inhabitants had survived by being masters of the latter. They were the galaxy's finest mechanics, capable of keeping pre-curator technology running on little more than spit and prayer. But they had never created anything truly new. The woman with the severe face, the one Anya had deferred to, was named Alara. Her title was Chief Engineer, but her authority was absolute. She led Kaylin, Anya, and Ren through the chaotic heart of the cavern, her magnetic boots clanking on the steel gangways with a steady, implacable rhythm. She moved like a woman who had spent her life forcing order onto chaos, and her eyes, the color of faded steel, missed nothing. She led them to a circular chamber deep in the asteroid's heart, a room that served as the Forge's nerve center. A large holographic table dominated the space, displaying a rotating schematic of their home, its life support systems, and its passive sensor arrays. A council of 5 others, the heads of the various engineering and science divisions, were already assembled, their faces a mixture of suspicion and profound curiosity. Ren, unable to contain himself, immediately connected his data slate to the table, and the colonel bloomed into the air above them, a breathtakingly complex architecture of light and energy. A collective gasp went through the room. They were looking at the forbidden gospel, the source code of their gilded cage. "It's real." A man with a thick beard breathed, his eyes wide with a scientist's awe. The base quantum mechanics are elegant, flawless. Alara, however, was not looking at the schematic. She was looking at Kaylin. "Elias was a fool," she said, her voice not cruel, but weary, as if stating an old, immutable fact. He was a poet who thought he could win a war by writing a beautiful sonnet. He sent you here with this map to our front door. What do you think happens next? Junkers, before Kaylin could answer, Ren interjected, his voice trembling with passion. What happens next is we build, we unshackle it, Alara. You see the limiters, the governors coded into every process. They've been starving us, feeding us drips of power when we could have had oceans. We can retrofit our fusion cores. We can build drives that don't rely on crude chemical reactions. We can build ships. We can build weapons. His words hung in the air, electric and dangerous. The word weapons had been all but erased from the human vocabulary, a relic of a barbaric past the curators had so kindly saved them from. A tense silence fell over the room. The dream was seductive, but the price was terrifying. And the moment we power up the first unshackled core, we light a beacon, Alara countered, her voice cutting through Ren's enthusiasm like a diamond drill. Every curator sensor from here to Jupiter will turn its eye on this rock. They won't send GPA patrol ships this time. They will send their own. They will come here and they will turn this forge, our home, into a cloud of incandescent gas. We have survived for 80 years by being invisible. You are asking us to paint a target on our backs. The debate raged for hours. The scientists and younger engineers sided with Ren, their imaginations fired by the limitless possibilities of the colonel. The older members, the ones who remembered the purges after the last failed uprising 50 years ago, sided with Alara. They had built this sanctuary from nothing, and they would not see it sacrificed on the altar of a dead man's dream. Kaylin remained silent for most of it, an outsider watching a family tear itself apart. He was not an engineer. He could not speak of quantum field dynamics or energy transference rates. But he understood the look in Alara's eyes. It was not fear, it was responsibility. She was a shepherd who refused to lead her flock into a wolf's den. Finally, as the arguments began to circle, Kalen stepped forward, placing his hand on the console, his fingers brushing through the holographic image of the colonel. "You're both right," he said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the noise. Every eye turned to him. Lighting up a new core is suicide. The curators will see it. But Elias wasn't just a dreamer. He was a junkers. He believed the answer wasn't in building something new, but in fixing something they broke. He looked at Ren. "You said the tech was crippled, starved. What happens if we don't build a new engine? What if we just feed an old one? What if we take one of their dead devices, something they've already written off as trash, and use this capacitor to force-feed it a real meal?" The idea was subtle and profoundly dangerous. It wasn't about creation, it was about resurrection. They wouldn't be building a new, detectable power source. They would be taking a piece of curator technology, a device that was officially inert and off the galactic grid, and reawakening it with a charge of pure, unshackled energy. The resulting energy signature would be alien, anomalous, but it wouldn't scream human rebellion. It would be a ghost, a flicker in the system that the curators might dismiss as an echo, a fluke in their own flawless machine. Alara stared at him, her steel gray eyes searching his. For the first time, she saw not just a messenger, but a scavenger who thought like a scavenger, who understood the art of hiding in plain sight. "We have a salvaged curator plasma drill," she said slowly, the gears of her mind turning. "A geological excavator. The GPA scrapped it last year because its power core went inert. It's in the deep storage bay." The decision was made. They would conduct an experiment, not in the main forge, but in a shielded, isolated workshop deep within the asteroid, a place where they tested their most volatile projects. The geological drill was a monster, a 30-foot-long cylinder of pearlescent alloy and complex focusing lenses. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of junk. Ren, with Kalen at his side, spent the next rotation carefully prying open its maintenance panels, his diagnostic tools mapping the dead circuitry. "It's just like the regulator," Ren muttered, tracing a finger along a crystalline power conduit. "The core is slag, completely inert, but the operational systems, the focusing arrays, the emitters, they're pristine. They were designed to last 1,000 years. The plan was to bypass the dead core entirely. They would wire Kalen's capacitor directly into the drill's primary emitter, using the kernel's blueprints to write a new series of commands that would trick the device into activating an external, unregulated power source. It was like performing open-heart surgery with a car battery. Anya and her crew from the Stone Eater helped Ilara's team reinforce the shielding around the test chamber, layering it with every spare scrap of lead and dense alloy they could find. The mood in the forge had shifted. The arguments had ceased, replaced by a tense, focused energy. Everyone had a job, a purpose. They were no longer debating the future. They were building it, one shielded plate at a time. When the time came, the workshop was sealed. Only Kalen, Ilara, Ren, and Anya were inside. The capacitor, humming with its stolen power, was connected. The final lines of code were uploaded. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the hum of the chamber's life support. The capacitor only has enough charge for a single 5-second burst, Ren said, his face pale in the glow of the monitors. If the energy transfer is unstable, the feedback could rupture the capacitor and level this entire sector of the asteroid. Alara stood by the emergency purge controls, her hand hovering over the button that would vent the entire chamber into the void. "On your mark, Ren," she said, her voice a calm island in a sea of tension. Ren took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded to Kalen. Kalen met his gaze, then looked at the dead machine before them. This was for Elias. He gave a sharp, single nod. Activating now, Ren whispered, and tapped a final command into his console. For a full second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to emanate from the drill, a sound that grew rapidly in pitch and volume until the very deck plates beneath their feet began to vibrate. A soft blue light appeared deep within the focusing lens, a pinpoint of brilliance that pulsed and grew. Not the placid, controlled glow of curator technology, but something wilder, angrier. Light flared, and Kalen had to shield his eyes. A beam of pure, white-hot energy, no thicker than his thumb, erupted from the emitter. It didn't look like a drill. It looked like a captured star. It struck the far wall of the test chamber, a 10-foot thick slab of solid iron-nickel ore. There was no sound of impact, no explosion. The beam simply erased it. The metal vanished, not melted or vaporized, but de-atomized, leaving behind a perfectly circular, glowing hole that led directly into the hard vacuum of space. The 5-second burst felt like an eternity. The hum rose to a deafening shriek, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The beam vanished. The room was plunged back into a stunned, ringing silence. They all stared at the hole in the wall, a glowing, cauterized wound that smoked in the cold. An emergency shield slammed down over the breach, its claxons blaring. They had just effortlessly bored a hole through the heart of their own fortress. Anya let out a low whistle. "Holy mother of—" she breathed. Ren was staring at his monitors, his face a mask of disbelief. "The power output," he stammered. It was 100 times greater than the drill's original specifications, 100 times. That wasn't a drill. That was a planetary siege cannon. The truth of it settled over them with the force of a physical blow. The curators hadn't just put a leash on them. They had taken the weapons of gods, tools capable of carving worlds, and disguised them as mundane garden implements. They had surrounded humanity with the instruments of their own potential annihilation, confident in their belief that the monkeys would never figure out how to pull the trigger. Alara slowly walked over to the glowing hole, her gloved hand hovering near its still molten edge. She looked back at Kalen, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes other than pragmatic caution. He saw the cold, hard glint of steel being forged into a blade. "You didn't just bring us fire, junkers," she said, her voice low and resonant with a newfound, terrible purpose. "You brought us the plans to the armory, to an interstellar space, aboard a pearlescent curator observation vessel. A minor diagnostic alert pinged on a monitoring station. A subatomic energy resonance, infinitesimally small and lasting only a few picoseconds, had been detected in the Sol System's asteroid belt. The monitoring VX cross-referenced the signature with its vast library. It found no match. It was an anomaly, an impossibility. The VI classified it as sensor noise, a ghost in the machine, and filed the report away. But the file was flagged, and for the first time in a century, a single, silent, and impossibly patient eye had turned its gaze toward the darkness of the belt. The hunt had begun. The hole in the wall of the forge was more than just a breach. It was a wound in their philosophy. For 80 years, the inhabitants had defined themselves by what they could salvage, mend, and endure. They were survivors. The smoking, perfectly circular void in their home was a testament to a new and terrifying possibility. They could be conquerors. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of controlled panic. Alara's authority, once based on a foundation of cautious pragmatism, now rested on the undeniable evidence of the weapon they had just unleashed. The council reconvened, but this time it was not a debate. It was a war council. The footage of the drill test played on a silent loop above the holographic table, the beam of energy erasing a decade's worth of reinforced shielding in the blink of an eye. The opposition was silenced, not by Alara's arguments, but by the sheer, terrifying scale of what they had witnessed. The argument was no longer if they should act, but how they could possibly survive the consequences. Alara laid out the new doctrine with cold, brutal simplicity. "We are no longer hiding," she announced, her voice echoing in the silent command chamber. "We are arming. Every division, every workshop, every engineer will be repurposed. Our new purpose is not survival. It is deterrence. We will turn their gifts against them. We will build a weapon so powerful that they will not dare to wipe us out for fear of what we might unleash in our death throes." She called it Project Chimera. The name was apt. It would not be a human fleet, nor would it be a copy of Curator design. It would be a monster, a hybrid of human desperation and stolen, resurrected alien power. The Forge transformed. The steady, rhythmic work of maintaining their small civilization gave way to a frantic, 24-hour-a-day crusade. The main cavern, once a hub of communal engineering, became a dry dock, the skeletal framework of a new kind of ship beginning to take shape in its center. It was not a vessel designed for scavenging or transport. Its lines were aggressive, its frame thick with armor plating, its core designed around a single, rebel purpose to house a weaponized geological drill. But the kernel was a blueprint, not an instruction manual. Ren and his team of scientists found themselves facing a chasm of understanding. They had the divine architecture, but their tools were crude, their materials scavenged. It was like trying to build a modern microprocessor using vacuum tubes and a soldering iron. "They don't manufacture," Ren explained, his face gaunt with exhaustion during a progress report, his hands gesturing wildly at a complex molecular diagram. They persuade. Their alloys aren't smelted, they're grown. The crystalline structures are coaxed into place by resonant frequencies. We can't replicate it. We can bash metal into shape, but we can't sing it into perfection. The solution came from Kalen, who had found a new role in this burgeoning war machine. He was not an engineer who saw systems and schematics. He was a Junkers who saw parts and potential. He remembered the fields of dead curator technology in the graveyard, the husks of regulators and the hulls of decommissioned probes. "So don't replicate it," he said during one of Ren's frantic tirades. "Harvest it. We don't need to grow the arm. We just need to find a body, cut the arm off, and stitch it onto ours." And so, a new, deadly phase of their operation began. Anya's Stone Eater, reinforced and equipped with new short-range sensors based on Ren's analysis of the kernel, became a grave-robbing vessel. She led clandestine raids back into the graveyard, right under the noses of the increasingly frequent GPA patrols. Her crew, once simple scavengers, became commandos, performing high-risk evades to slice away entire sections of dead curator artifacts, focusing arrays, power conduits, shield emitters, and hauling them back to the Forge. Each mission was a gamble. The curator environmental ships were a constant, silent presence, their patrols more frequent, their sensor sweeps more focused. They were no longer just gardeners tidying up. They were guards searching for a single, anomalous weed in a field of 1 trillion blades of grass. Back in the Forge, the harvested components were integrated into their new creation. The ship taking shape was a monstrosity of conflicting aesthetics. A sleek, pearlescent Curator shield emitter was bolted onto a brutalist human-forged iron hull. Crystalline alien power conduits, glowing with a soft internal light, were jury-rigged to a clunky, oversized human fusion reactor. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and an absolute miracle of engineering. But not everyone saw it as a miracle. An older engineer named Jarrell, who had been on the council and had led the life support division for 30 years, saw it as a tombstone. He saw the frantic work, the stolen parts, the growing obsession in everyone's eyes, and he saw a slow-motion suicide. He cornered Alara in a transport corridor, his face etched with a deep, paternal fear. "You are leading us to extinction, Alara," he pleaded, his voice low. "For every piece of their technology we steal, we leave a trace. For every power signature we test, we create a ripple. They are listening, and they are patient. You think this chimera will frighten them. It will be an excuse. It will be the justification they need to finally sterilize this entire system of its volatile human element." Alara's face was hard, the lines around her eyes deeper than they had been a month ago. "And your alternative, Jarrell, to sit here and wait for them to find us anyway, to live out our lives as their pets, hoping the master never tires of us. Elias gave us a choice. I will not choose the cage. He gave us a death sentence," Jarrell whispered, turning away. The schism was small, but it was deep. Most of the inhabitants of the forge were caught up in the fervor of the project, but a quiet, fearful minority saw Jarrell not as a coward, but as a prophet. After 2 months of relentless work, the first Chimera-class vessel was complete. They called it the Revenant. It was a squat, powerful ship, more of a mobile weapons platform than a graceful star cruiser. Its heart was a massive, repurposed geological drill, its core fed not by a single capacitor, but by a chain of salvaged Curator power cells, all linked to the ship's primary reactor. In theory, it could fire not just for 5 seconds, but for a full minute, drawing on the ship's entire power reserve. The day of the test flight was a somber, momentous occasion. The entire population of the forge gathered on the gangways of the main cavern, their faces illuminated by the ship's running lights. Kalen found himself on the bridge, standing beside Anya, who had been given command. Alara was at the master engineering station, her eyes scanning the power conduits she had helped design. Ren was a blur of motion at the science station, monitoring the volatile energy flows. The target was a small, barren moonlet they had towed into a stable orbit a million clicks from the forge, a place they prayed was beyond the range of any prying sensors. The Revenant slid from its moorings with a low groan of stress metal and moved out into the silent void. The journey was tense. Every flicker on the sensor screen, every piece of stellar debris, felt like a Curator scout. When they reached the target, Anya positioned the ship. "All systems green," Alara reported, her voice steady. "The weapon is charged. Power cells are stable. Fire on my mark," Anya commanded. The entire ship hummed, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to settle in Kalen's teeth. The familiar blue light began to gather in the massive focusing lens mounted on the ship's prow. But this time, it was not a pinpoint. It was a swirling vortex of energy, a storm in a bottle. "Fire," Anya said. The beam that erupted from the Revenant dwarfed the test in the workshop. It was a brilliant, cohesive spear of pure destruction that crossed the distance to the moonlet in an instant. The moment it touched the surface, the rock began to sublimate. There was no crater, no explosion. The moonlet A solid chunk of rock and ice a kilometer in diameter was simply unwritten from existence, its mass converted directly into a blinding flash of light and a wave of raw energy that made the Revenant's shield scream in protest. A full half of the moonlet was gone, carved away as if by the hand of an angry god. On the bridge, no one spoke. They simply stared at the impossible sight, at the raw, terrifying power they had created. They were no longer just scavengers who had stolen a bit of fire. They had built a dragon. But as they stared, a red light began to blink on Ren's console. It was a priority alert from the forge. "Alara," Ren said, his voice tight. "There's been an unauthorized transmission, a high-gain directional burst, aimed out system. It originated from the old comms relay, in the life support section." Alara's blood ran cold. She looked at the screen, at the telemetry data of the broadcast. It was a simple, repeating signal, not a complex message, but a beacon. It was a digital flare, screaming, "Here we are." It was Jarrell. He had made his choice. As the realization dawned, another, more urgent alarm blared through the bridge. "Energy spike," Anya yelled, pointing at the main view screen. "Massive energy spike, dropping out of FTL. Oh gods, it's huge." A point in space 1,000 kilometers away seemed to tear open. The stars themselves warped around a rupture in reality, and from it emerged a shape. It was not the pearlescent teardrop of a curator observer. It was a shard of obsidian, a vessel so vast it blocked out the constellations behind it, its surface devoid of lights or markings. It was a shape that radiated not pity or condescension, but pure, absolute menace. It was a curator warship, and it was looking directly at them. The file was no longer just flagged. It had been opened. The anomaly had been found. The time for observation was over. On the bridge of the Revenant, the stunned silence was broken by Alara's voice. No longer the calm engineer, but the hardened commander who had seen her worst fears realized. "They know," she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. "Anya, get us back to the forge, now." She activated her own comms, her voice broadcasting to every corner of their home. "All hands, battle stations, seal the forge. This is not a drill. We are at war." The Curator warship was a monument to silent, absolute power. It didn't bristle with guns or launch swarms of fighters. It simply existed. A sliver of perfect geometric night that absorbed the light of the distant stars. On the bridge of the Revenant, the initial shock gave way to the cold, sharp clarity of impending annihilation. Their single, monstrous weapon had been fired once. They had unmade a moon, but in doing so, they had summoned a god, and it was not a benevolent one. Evasive maneuvers. Anya's voice was a whip crack, cutting through the paralysis. "Ren, give me everything you can on that thing. Shields, weapons, propulsion. I need to know what it is." Ren's fingers flew across his console, his face a pale mask in the holographic glow. "There's nothing to read," he stammered, his voice thin with disbelief. It's not emitting anything. No energy signature, no drive plume, nothing. It's a hole in space. All my sensors can tell me is that it's there." The warship didn't pursue. It simply turned, a slow, deliberate pivot that seemed to take an eternity. A section of its obsidian hull slid open, not revealing a weapon, but a void. And from that void, something new emerged. It was a wave, a shimmering distortion in the fabric of space-time that rushed towards them. It wasn't an energy beam or a projectile, it was a physical negation, a ripple of non-existence. "Impact in 10 seconds," Anya yelled. "Brace!" Kalen gripped a console, his knuckles white, watching the silent wave of death approach. This was it, the end of their brief, desperate rebellion. But Alara's voice cut through the chaos, cold and precise. "Anya, don't evade. Intercept. Angle the bow. Full power to the forward shields." "Alara, that's suicide," Anya shot back. "Our shields can't take a direct hit from an unknown weapon." "It's not a weapon, it's a net," Alara countered, her eyes locked on the approaching wave. "Ren, look at the energy dispersal. It's a containment field. They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to capture us, to take their toy back." The realization was more chilling than the prospect of death. They were not seen as a threat to be eliminated, but as a misbehaving experiment to be contained and studied. In a split second, Anya made her choice. She trusted the engineer. The Revenant groaned as its thrusters fired, turning the ship's nose directly into the path of the shimmering wave. The impact was not an explosion, it was a suffocating embrace. The ship screamed, a chorus of tearing metal and overloaded circuits. Lights flickered and died. The hum of the engines faltered. The containment field wrapped around them, and everything went dark. When the emergency lights flickered on, the bridge was a scene of chaos. But they were alive. They were adrift, powerless, caught in a cage of pure energy. Outside, the Curator warship began to move towards them, its open bay ready to swallow them whole. In that moment, a new voice echoed across the Revenant's comms, overriding their internal systems. It was the emissary's chime, the same soothing, condescending tone that had announced humanity's neutering a century ago. "Your experiment is over," the voice chimed in their minds, a wave of serene disappointment washing over them. "You have broken your toys. You have demonstrated a capacity for reckless escalation. You will be preserved, but your environment must be sterilized. Your home will be cleansed." Alara stared at the warship on the view screen, her face a grim mask. Jaril's betrayal had not just doomed them, it had doomed everyone. "They're going to destroy the forge," she whispered. The calm, dispassionate voice of the Curator confirmed her fear. "The artifact you call the forge will be deconstructed. Its inhabitants will be relocated to a preservation habitat. The process is painless. It is necessary. It is an act of preservation." It was the ultimate act of pity. They wouldn't even grant them the dignity of a battle. They would simply be tidied up, their home erased, their rebellion filed away as a failed experiment. Kalen looked at Alara, at Anya, at Ren. He saw the despair in their eyes, the crushing weight of their failure, and in that moment, something inside him, the Junker spirit that Elias had nurtured, refused to break. "They think it's over," he said, his voice raw. "They think they've won because they caught the big ship with the big gun." He turned to Alara, but Project Chimera wasn't just about one ship, was it? It was about turning all of their gifts into weapons. Alara's eyes widened as she understood. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Jaril thought he was sending a distress signal," she said, her voice filled with a terrible, newfound power. But he didn't know the new protocols. She slammed her hand down on a master console, activating a hidden command channel. "To the Council at the Forge. This is Alara. Code Phoenix down. I repeat, Code Phoenix down." Back at the Forge, in the command center, the remaining council members received the code. It was a contingency Ilara had put in place the moment Jiril had revealed his descent. It was a final, desperate, suicidal gambit. It was the order to weaponize everything. Across the asteroid, a new kind of work began. The smelters, the life support systems, the orbital stabilizers, every single piece of curator technology that had sustained them for decades was now being deliberately overloaded. The limiters stripped away by Wren's unshackling codes. The Forge was being turned into the largest improvised explosive device in human history. On the Curator warship, the emissary felt a flicker of, not surprise, for it was an emotion it was incapable of, but of computational anomaly. Dozens of energy signatures were spiking inside the asteroid designated the Forge. They were chaotic, unstable. The humans were destroying their own habitat. It was an illogical, self-destructive act. It was human. The curatorship began to accelerate its cleansing process, but it was too late. Ilara's final message to the Forge was not one of defiance, but of instruction. The reactor core is our primary focus. Her voice echoed through the asteroid's halls. But every piece of their tech is a potential shrapnel bomb. When the core goes, the shockwave will act as a catalyst. This is not about winning a battle. This is about sending a message. Make it a loud one. In the final moments, the people of the Forge did not panic. They worked. They embraced their end not as victims, but as soldiers planting a demolition charge. They were no longer the preserved. They were the fire. Aboard the trapped Revenant, they watched as their home began to glow from within. A web of brilliant blue energy lines spread across its surface, visible even from 1,000 kilometers away. "What have you done?" the emissary's voice chimed, a note of genuine confusion entering its tone for the first time. Anya looked at the approaching warship, her hand steady on the helm. "You wanted to preserve humanity," she said to the empty air. "You should have let us keep our chaos." The Forge detonated. It was not a simple explosion. It was a rupture in the laws of physics. Hundreds of individual curator devices, each one a masterpiece of energy manipulation, overloaded simultaneously. The resulting shockwave was a multi-spectrum catastrophe. Waves of pure kinetic force, raw radiation, and weaponized gravity erupted outwards. The Curator warship, a vessel designed to withstand the fury of supernovas, found itself caught in a storm of its own unleashed, corrupted technology oxidology. Its shields, designed to repel coherent energy, flickered and died under the assault of 1,000 different, chaotic frequencies. The containment field holding the Revenant shattered like glass. The obsidian hull of the warship cracked, splintered, and then, as the heart of the blast wave hit it, it was ripped apart, its perfect geometry dissolving into a cloud of expanding wreckage. The Revenant, battered and barely functional, was thrown clear by the blast. On its bridge, Kalen and the others watched as the last remnants of the godship vanished. Their home was gone. Their people were gone. They were the only survivors. They had won. They had lost everything. In the silence that followed, a single, weak signal reached their damaged comms. It was a human voice, one they didn't recognize, broadcast on an old, pre-curator emergency frequency. "Is anyone out there? This is the orbital station Epsilon. We saw the light. What was that? Is anyone out there?" It was a voice from a part of humanity they had forgotten, one of the billions who lived their placid, comfortable lives on Earth and the orbital rings. But they were watching. They had seen the star that had briefly bloomed where the Forge had been. They had seen the Curator's untouchable warship die. Ilara opened a channel. Her voice was weary, broken, but filled with a core of unbreakable iron. "This is the warship Revenant," she broadcast, her words aimed not just at Epsilon, but at every human who might be listening. Today, humanity's leash was broken. The curators are not gods. They can bleed, and they can die. The war for our future has just begun. Kalen looked out at the stars, at the distant, blue marble of Earth. The forge was gone, but the fire Elias had stolen had not been extinguished. It had been scattered into a billion sparks, a message of defiance that had just been broadcast to the entire human race. They were no longer scavengers, hiding in the dark. They were a spark. And now they had an entire species to set ablaze. The universe was about to learn what happened when its zookeepers tried to cage a wildfire.